Okay, is the camera working this time? I really hope so. Okay, so let's see if we can get this shared and working. Gotta just love technical problems. So I think the sound is actually working this time. Here's hoping. This is why we do these things, for the pure joy of getting it all very, very wrong. Okay, so let's delete the old tweet, which had the wrong URL in it. Okay, that one's correct. Okay, and we're going to ask the questions. Okay, so this needs to go. Okay, so, right, let's try again. Now, it appears to me that the sound is working. I think so. So let's see how we get on this time. So we have a few different questions here. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for tuning in. Thanks for bearing with me while I try and work out the technical issues. It's, I think, good for me to try these things, put myself out of the comfort zone. So first question I've got here is from Sam, who is asking basically what needs to change in order for eating disorders treatments to be better. And we're talking about whether it's about early intervention or prevention. And there's a couple of different things here. One is about whether, yay, it's working. Hurrah. So one is about whether we can try and do some more preventative work in schools. So we've got a great opportunity now with the new health education curriculum coming on board. And the fact that we may now increasingly be able to teach our students about things like the warning signs for eating disorders and make them aware of the pathways that they might be able to go to for support. So hopefully, as part of our new health education curriculum, certainly here in the UK, we would hope that our students will become more aware of pathways, what to do if they're worried about themselves, what to do if they're worried about a friend. And certainly in my work with schools, I'm finding they're becoming much, much better at picking up the kind of early warning signs and getting students through to help as needed. Now, the difficulty that we have at the moment is with the massive kind of chronic underfunding of services. So although eating disorders are one of the services that have benefited from some additional funding compared to other mental health services, it's just still not enough. And what we know about eating disorders is that the earlier we can intervene, the more likely we are to be successful. And actually, the cheaper and quicker that treatment is, because when eating disordered thoughts and behaviors are allowed to entrench, it becomes much, much harder to kind of begin to break those cycles. So we ideally really want to get in early. So I would hope that we'll have this increasing push for more services, a quicker response, and supporting people as quickly as possible with their eating disorder. The other thing is trying to increase awareness amongst practitioners that we shouldn't only be looking for underweight. So eating disorders can occur at any weight. They can cause huge kind of physical issues, as well as obviously, massive mental distress, not just if someone is underweight, which is often the thing that people historically have looked for. So for example, Hope Virgo is doing a big campaign at the moment about Ditch the Scales, saying that too many people are turned away from eating disorders treatment because their weight isn't low enough, and actually trying to get people to realize the diagnostic criteria for eating disorders does not necessarily require that you are very, very underweight. A key group who get missed out on are people who have perhaps lost a significant amount of weight but still fall within a healthy weight range, and they are, perhaps struggling with anorexia, but they're not yet meeting that requirement of very, very low weight. The other difficulty is that with our services having been so sort of chronically underfunded, then the thresholds have kind of got higher and higher and higher over time, to the point where you have to be, really incredibly unwell before they'll even begin to start thinking about treating you. And actually, one of the really damaging things there can be the messages that it sends to someone with an eating disorder if essentially they get told you're not ill enough. And this is certainly something that I have personally experienced in the past, that even when very underweight, essentially you're told by someone, well, but you're not as ill as you need to be in order to meet the requirements for treatment, which can kind of feed the disorder and can also kind of send you away thinking, I need to go lose more weight essentially, essentially, or else I'm not worthy of help. So yeah, we need to be able to treat people at every weight. We need to try and get that treatment as fast as possible. But obviously there's a massive funding issue there. But the other thing that is great, as I say, is the kind of work that we're doing with frontline staff, upskilling people to recognize the warning signs, trying to intervene early, and also teaching people lots of sort of healthy coping skills. So hopefully, again, through the kind of health education curriculum, looking at mental health throughout the whole age course, then we will be teaching our kids from a really young age to be more emotionally literate, to develop more healthy coping skills, and also to know how to help seek early if they need input. So talking today about eating disorders and answering any questions that you have. So I've got various questions coming in via Twitter, but you're also more than welcome to leave them as a comment on YouTube as well, and I will answer as many as I can. So that was Sam's question about what do we need to do in order to kind of shake up eating disorder services. A question here from Escaped Orty saying, is it possible to be classed as having an eating disorder if some days you binge and other days you eat nothing? They don't seem to fit the norm. Okay, so actually, yes, the eating disorder criteria are different. There are a range of different eating disorders. So our kind of primary diagnoses, we've got binge eating disorder, which involves eating objectively large amounts of food over small periods of time. We have bulimia nervosa, which involves binging and purging. And then we have anorexia nervosa, which is largely restrictive and might involve over exercise as well. However, there's a whole range of other kind of combinations of those different behaviors, which might fall into the category of what we call OSFED, so other specified feeding and eating disorders. And this might mean that you've kind of, you've got some of the behaviors from one and some of the behaviors from another, and you don't quite fit into a box. And whilst when you're looking at the diagnostic criteria, you think, well, I don't fit neatly. Most people don't fit neatly. We are human and we don't go well into boxes. So eating disorders can be quite messy and they don't necessarily fit neatly in the diagnostic criteria. And that's why we have these other criteria that kind of looks to sort of mop up everyone else, if you like. The thing that makes if you're wondering if what you've got is an eating disorder, if the behaviors, the thoughts and the feelings that you've got, this is basically anybody who is using kind of food, weight, shape, exercise as a way of dealing with difficult thoughts or feelings or experiences. So essentially, if someone's got an unhealthy relationship with food, and that's the way that they're managing feelings in some way, then that is potentially eating disordered behavior. And the point at which we become kind of really concerned about that, and it's something we need to do something about, is when we're seeing this having a significant impact on day-to-day life. So maybe it's stopping you from doing things, either because you are becoming sort of socially withdrawn, or anxiety is stopping you doing things, or maybe the actual behaviors around food are stopping you from engaging with things that you'd want to, or perhaps because you become, for example, very kind of underweight or overweight or something like that, and that kind of stops you engaging. So the impact on your day-to-day life, and also that it's happening over a period of time. So it's just not something that's kind of coming and going really quickly, but something that is lasting for a while. So don't feel, if it's you or it's someone that you're concerned about, just because you don't fit really neatly into those diagnostic criteria, it is absolutely worth having that conversation. It's absolutely worth going and talking to a doctor and trying to get that input if you can. Okay, looking through for other questions here. My timeline is quite full because I'm having a really tough day. So I've had a couple of very peoply days, and I have autism. And so what happens after that is I have a down day, and I know that's going to come. I expect it. However, it always hits me like a ton of bricks, and it's really hard. So I've had a really difficult day, and I shared that on Twitter earlier, so I've now got all the love coming, which is really kind, so thank you. And it does make me feel less alone, and I haven't replied because I find it really tough, but like genuinely thank you. Okay, next, another question here. I was wondering what will happen to services trialing at Freed from ED unless they employ more staff to facilitate than older adults, also requiring early intervention. They'll have a really long wait. I actually don't know exactly what's going to happen with that service. I couldn't comment on that. Sorry. Don't want to pretend to know something about something that I don't, because that's a bad idea. Remember, you're more than welcome to put questions directly through on here if you've got questions that you would like to ask. Now, there was a question here about dentistry. So outdoor prescription asking a request more than a question, but can you use your public profile to raise the issue of dental treatment and eating disorders? My view is that it should be something asked and reviewed as part of someone's care plan, but this isn't the case. Now, I'm not quite sure which angle you're coming at this from, whether what we're thinking is that people who have a diagnosed eating disorder, we need to think about their dental care plan, or if we're thinking about the input from dentists. So if you're watching, then let me know what you meant, but I'll try and kind of answer both. So okay, so dentists and dental assistants can have a really important part to play in terms of picking up eating disorders, because some eating disorders, we can work really, really hard to mask them, and we might do a really good job of doing that to most people. However, in some instances, a dentist or a dental assistant might be able to pick up the signs. The most common one here being if you are struggling with bulimia and your method of purging is vomiting, then it can cause enamel erosion. Now, you might be maintaining a stable weight. People might not notice a change in your weight. They might not notice the behaviors. You might work really, really hard to mask it, but you can't hide that enamel erosion. And a dentist or a dental assistant might see that. And so one of the things we need to think about is how we train up our dental staff to know what they're seeing, and to be able to give good advice to those patients, and to do that non-judgmentally. And certainly I found, I'm really phobic of dentists, but I have found that when I've had kind, non-judgmental dental input, it's been really helpful. Being told things like, if you are sick, it's really important that you don't brush you don't brush your teeth directly afterwards, because that can cause further erosion. And also giving advice around other things that can slow down that enamel erosion. So making sure that you're trying to avoid fizzy drinks, for example, and juices and that sort of thing. So they can be, it can be really, really helpful. And that can be an in then to the further conversation. Giving dental staff advice on how to start this conversation and what they should do if they're concerned about someone, I think is really important. And there is certainly increasing interest here. Then the other flip side is you might be asking about whether, as a part of everybody with an eating disorders care plan, we should be thinking about their dental care, because we know that people with eating disorders often do have poor oral hygiene and dental problems. So maybe from vomiting, but also it might be because of malnutrition. We can have bad teeth, and actually looking after our teeth is hugely important, because sometimes if things go wrong with our teeth, that can trigger issues with our eating disorder. So for me personally, when I had to have a tooth removed, that triggered a big relapse for me with losing weight, because I had a few days when I couldn't eat comfortably, and that was enough for the anorexia to take hold again. And I know that's not an uncommon experience. So yeah, I don't know. Certainly, as part of my eating disorder treatment, no one's ever really asked me about dental care. And I think it's a really interesting question, and one I will think about in future. But yeah, sorry, don't know direct answers there. But yes, it's, there's lots of links there, and it's something we need to be aware of and perhaps think a little bit more about. Just checking if we have any questions on here. Got more coming in on Twitter, which is lovely. Why do eating disorders sometimes run in families? Anecdotally, it seems quite common. So why do they run in families? Really good question. There's a couple of different reasons here, and it's that whole nature versus nurture thing. So first of all, just to give a bit of an understanding about eating disorders, they are complicated, and they are an interplay of biological, psychological, and environmental factors. There's many, many different factors which contribute to eating disorders. So it could be biological, why they might run in families. So somebody who has a history within the family of eating disorder might be more likely biologically to be predisposed to an eating disorder. Equally, it can be that these behaviors might be learned. And this is why it's really important that people who recover from eating disorders are taught healthy ways to support their family in order to try and encourage healthy eating and a healthy relationship with food. Because, of course, if we are exposed to eating disordered behaviors, then that might be something that we kind of pick up on. So yeah, so so it can be either. It can be sort of nature or nurture, but I think it's really important to point out that this isn't inevitable. So it's really common for people to worry, and this is a massive worry that I've had as a mum of 2 young daughters, that this will, that I might perpetuate this. But we know that it is absolutely possible to break that cycle, that you can raise happy, healthy kids. And so we need to think about, encouraging those healthy coping mechanisms and all that sort of thing. But yeah, so basically it's complicated. I mean, it's still a pretty young science. We don't know the absolute ins and outs of it. And, we can have identical twins where one develops an eating disorder and the other one doesn't. So there is absolutely an environmental part at play here too. But yes, it can be, partly biology and partly that it could be kind of a learned behavior. And the other thing is that we know that if we have known that this is a way that has worked for someone else, kind of coping wise, that might be something we're more likely to do. So it's a bit like why we see this big increase in self-harming behavior. Now, one of the theories behind that is just that people are more aware of it. We've kind of normalized it. It's a behavior that people are more aware of. If you're in a family where there has been a lot of eating disorder behavior, you might just be more aware of that as a kind of potential coping mechanism. Okay, any more questions coming through on Twitter? Okay, lots of stuff about autism. Maybe I should do a live stream on autism sometime. Okay, so a question here saying about how common are the different eating disorders. This is an interesting question. So with the eating disorders that tend to get the most airtime are actually the least common. So anorexia nervosa is the eating disorder that tends to kind of feature in the media more. It makes for kind of quite sensational headlines and that kind of thing when you get people who are very, very underweight, but actually anorexia nervosa is the least common of all the eating disorders. However, it is also the one that has the poorest outcomes. So there is the highest risk of death. And so it receives also a lot of airtime in terms of research compared to the other eating disorders too, historically. So anorexia, we think, affects about 1 in 100 people. And it's important to point out it can affect anyone of any gender, of any culture, any background. So again, there's this stereotype that it's just kind of rich, white, middle class teenage girls. And whilst we do see, increased prevalence in that group, actually this can affect men, women. It can affect people who are of any ethnicity, of all different ages as well. So huge range of people there. So anorexia about 1 in 100. Bulimia nervosa and binge eating disorder, a bit harder to know the prevalence of, but perhaps up to 3 or 4 times more common. Tend to find the onset with bulimia certainly a bit later, and people are less likely to seek treatment, we think, for bulimia and binge eating disorder. There can often be a lot of sort of shame and guilt associated with those, and also people often don't pick up on the warning signs. If you are suffering with anorexia and it makes you very underweight, people tend to get very concerned about that and will you'll be kind of encouraged to seek treatment, or your health might get to a point where you become admitted for kind of physical reasons, so you're perhaps more likely to go into treatment, whereas bulimia and binge eating disorder perhaps less so, although the physical ramifications in the short term might not be as negative, but we know that there are lots of longer term issues that can be related to those issues. And the other thing with bulimia is that the kind of binge purge can sometimes cause physical issues sort of fairly suddenly, so we can get sort of imbalances of electrolytes and that sort of thing as well. Okay, seeing if there's any more questions coming through. Lots more stuff about autism. So note to self, don't put out a couple of different things when you want to Okay, so here, what's the difference between anorexia and bulimia? So anorexia is characterized by restriction. We might see over-exercise, restriction of food intake, and it tends to go along with weight loss. Although remember, someone could be at any weight and get a diagnosis of anorexia. Now you don't have to be, used to be that you had to be 85% or less of the weight you should be for your height in order to get that diagnosis. That is no longer the case. So you might have started overweight and you might have come down into a healthy weight range, but if you've lost a significant amount of weight in a short period of time, and that's going along with difficult thoughts and feelings and experiences around food and weight and shape, then you could get that diagnosis of anorexia, but we are tending to see weight loss. Whereas bulimia, it has a binge and purge cycle. So you're eating objectively large amounts of food and then you're using compensatory behaviors in order to remove that food. We might find that people with bulimia, their weight might fluctuate over time. For many, their weight can remain relatively stable, so it can be much, much harder to pick up on. And those behaviors tend to have kind of guilt and shame that go with them. So there can be quite a lot of hiding of that behavior too. And then the other eating disorder is binge eating disorder. Which is where we objectively eat those large amounts of food. That might happen in secret and it might feel really out of control, but that doesn't have the purging to go with it. And so what we tend to find there is that someone's weight will be increasing over time. And then we have OSFED as well, other specified feeding and eating disorders, which includes some specified disorders, but also it includes all those people who don't quite fit into the diagnostic categories as well. Okay, just looking, I've got a couple of other questions. Okay, nope, that's not. I thought that was there was a question coming through on my DMs, but that's about something different. And another one here. No, okay, so any more? No, I think we might be there. Let's check if we've got any more questions coming up directly on the live stream. So yeah, thanks for kind of bearing with. Oh, okay. Abominable Snowman saying, could you explain why PTSD and eating disorders are often comorbid? Okay, that's a big question. So I have post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and also have an eating disorder. And for me, so two diagnoses were important to help me finally get on top of my eating disorder. One was PTSD and the other was autism. So the why are PTSD and eating disorders often comorbid? That's a really complicated question, but essentially eating disorders often come about when we have had difficult experiences, and it's our way of kind of coping with that. So it can be that food might make us feel more numb, or it might make our kind of way of approaching food and exercise might make us feel in control when everything else feels out of control. And PTSD can make you feel quite out of control because your life is being overtaken by kind of flashbacks and anxiety and things that feel beyond your control, but you might feel like food and exercise is something that you can control. It can be that it can be a way of kind of communicating. So sometimes people will develop different kind of behaviors around food, and it can be a way of essentially sort of asking for help when we don't know how else to ask for help. I mean, there's lots of, it's very, very complicated. Post-traumatic stress disorder can lead to all sorts of other issues, including things like self-harm and eating disorders. And I think it's important to understand that eating disorders, we don't just need to treat the eating disorder behavior. We need to understand kind of what's driving that, what need is the eating disorder meeting, and how else can we meet that need. And so for people who have got a history of trauma, it will be about thinking, how can we kind of support that person to overcome that trauma and get it to a point where it's not having this big impact on their day-to-day life, where they end up having to use food or weight or exercise as a way of managing that. So I hope that kind of explains it a little bit. If you've got kind of further questions on that, do feel free to add. Okay, and then some dude, great name. What do the names of these disorders mean? That's a good question. The names are sort of almost irrelevant at this point because they come from like ancient history. So I know that anorexia nervosa literally translates as nervous loss of appetite, which it doesn't really describe the condition as we know it now at all, but it was the name that was given to it historically when it was kind of first diagnosed. But obviously this is a science that is evolving, and we know that it's much, much more complicated than simply a nervous loss of appetite. I actually can't remember what bulimia nervosa stands for. I'm guessing the nervosa is also something to do with nervous. But yeah, in terms of what they describe, so anorexia nervosa or anorexia is a restrictive eating disorder. We might be over exercising or under eating, restricting our food intake, and tends to go with a loss of weight, although we might not necessarily be underweight. Bulimia nervosa is binging and purging, so eating objectively large amounts of food, then taking measures to remove that food. And then binge eating disorder is when we're eating objectively large amounts of food but without the purging. Then we have OSFED, our other specified feeding and eating disorders, which can be people who are perhaps crossing over into a few different areas there, or they have other sort of specific issues like pica, eating of non-edible items, for example. Do feel free to ask any more questions. I think I'm getting to the end of them now, so I will call it a moment. I'm just going to go double check in Facebook if there's any more in there, because they are kind of cropping up. No, just people liking it, which is kind. I've had quite a lot of people commenting on my recent video about eating disorders in adults, and thank you for your kind feedback on that one. And yeah, for those of you who said it kind of made you feel less alone and that you could identify with that, I think it's something that we need to explore more, and certainly I will try and do some more work kind of raising awareness in that and thinking about it. I find it difficult sometimes to know whether obviously some of my interests come from my own history, and it's hard to know sometimes whether this is a genuine thing that it's worth taking forward, or if it's just that I'm interested because it's about me. So do let me know which areas you want me to be doing more work on. Okay, I think I'm gonna draw it to an end there. We did finally get it working. Thank you for persevering with me while I got through all the technical issues, and maybe we will do future live streams together. Jay Harrison, thank you. Think bulimia means ravenous hunger, which I guess describes the binging part, but not necessarily the other compensatory part. Well, yes, okay, that would make sense. That would describe the binging bit. Cool. Well, thank you ever so much for everyone who joined in, and for those of you who watch back. I know not many people necessarily watch back afterwards. Do join my channel. I try and send new videos out on a Tuesday and a Friday. There'll be a new video going out tomorrow. I'm just going to go off and edit it now, which is going to be about the warning signs for eating disorder. So hopefully you will tune in to that one. But yeah, thank you so much for joining. I will tackle your question, Abominable Snowman, on another day. That's a big question, and I'm about to sign out now. But thank you so much, and see you again soon. Bye.